Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, we will hear some of the speech delivered by State Senator Ralph Alvarado at the Republican National Convention. And WKYT's Sam Dick recently talked with Lexington Police Chief Mark Barnard about community and law enforcement relations and interactions. That's later. But first, Kentucky Justice and Safety Secretary John Tilley is here. Secretary Tilley was the House Judiciary Chairman before he became the most prominent Democrat to join the administration of Republican Governor Matt Bevin. Tilley is a Hopkinsville native. He has been nationally recognized for his efforts in judicial reform and drug control policy. Today we want to find out about how Kentucky is addressing a drug problem that many describe as a crisis for families and for local police and prosecutors who are trying to deal with it. We'll ask some other issues facing law enforcement with Secretary John Tilley, who in another life, by the way, a quarter of a century ago, was an intern here at WKYT and worked in TV before going on to law school and becoming a prosecutor. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. It's been a while since those days.
Oh, I have fond memories of being here. In fact, I just instinctively turned into the right place and got to the right door to get here, so it was great.
We appreciate you coming in. You've tried to address this drug problem in Kentucky, as many have, both as a lawmaker and now as Justice Secretary. Still, we hear these stories, skyrocketing overdose deaths, parents abandoning their children to get a fix. It's a tough problem, isn't it?
Well, it's a scourge. I mean, it's an epidemic. When the Centers for Disease Control term it an epidemic, it is officially an epidemic. We lost 1,248 Kentuckians last year. We're third in the country in overdose deaths. The difference now is it's gone from a heroin battlefield to a heroin laced with fentanyl, or a fentanyl battlefield, which is an illicit drug that is manufactured now. It's synthetic. It's sometimes 50 to 100 times more powerful than heroin. And so we've moved so quickly from prescription pills, which are still around, to heroin, to now fentanyl, and it's all opioid based, and it's an opioid addiction problem. And until we break that cycle, we're going to be battling a different drug until we figure out a way to solve this crisis.
How does it so quickly morph from one problem to another?
Such great profit margin, cartels and commercial traffickers, and these operations that, again, that exist outside the United States, that ship their drugs here and ship the again, the precursors to make these drugs here, can do so easily. They can come across our borders very easily. We need the interdiction of the DEA and the federal government, and we need more of it. But until we figure out a way to be as flexible as necessary and to change the culture around what makes Kentucky in particular, but America so addicted, I think we'll be battling this for a long time.
Because you come back to the question, what drives the demand? If it were just coming here and nobody wanted it, it wouldn't be abused as it is.
That's right. I mean, there is a significant demand. Again, I think you can point to the reason that Kentucky is probably where it is in terms of, in so many cases, sadly, a national leader in some of these areas of addiction and mental illness. I think you bring up mental illness, oftentimes people are self-medicating a mental illness or self-medicating a trauma that occurred in their lives, whether it be physical or sexual. But in this case, this country consumes, and you can point to different opioids, but well over 90% in some cases of the opioids made are consumed in the United States. And that's startling. We tend to think there's a pill to cure everything and a fix for everything. And I think that began the country on a road to addiction with opioids, you know, prescription painkillers, which then moved to heroin and is now moving to synthetics, which are easier to make. You don't have to get them from a doctor or prescription. They're cheaper to obtain. You can go down to your street corner and get them for a few bucks. And that's what is really driving this problem now.
A prosecutor in a relatively large Kentucky county recently told me that we are fighting hard, but we are losing. Your reaction to that?
I think that's accurate. I do. I think Kentucky, in many ways, and actually in most ways, is a national leader in drug policy. The recent National Safety Council report put out 6 recommendations, and Kentucky has met all 6, and we're only one of 6 states that has. the CDC has put out a list of recommendations, and the governor and I and our drug control policy director sat down to look at those recommendations, and we realized that we've met all of them. We need to challenge ourselves to go beyond that, but we're now leading the country in drug policy. Sadly, we have to, because the problem is more acute here than elsewhere. That's not to say it's not acute across the country. It is. We just happen to be a leader, maybe a top 10, top 5 state.
What are some of those things that we have done where we have met the threshold?
Well, first of all, we have the gold standard in what's called a prescription drug monitoring program. It's called CASPR, and that is the gold standard. Every other state models theirs after ours. The national standard is modeled after ours. We can catch folks who are doctor shopping. We can maintain a list of what particular patients are taking so that they're not taking too many opioids and not at risk of becoming addicted. We can also, again, increase treatment. We've done that. We've increased access to treatment. That's one of the recommendations. That's one we need to work on, though, access to the best treatment. Although we have increased, Bill, in this state since 2004, drug treatment by 1,200%, 600% since about 2012. So we've made incredible strides there, and that is working. But we need more and more treatment. We don't even have half the capacity that we actually need. More recommendations are, again, interdiction, which we're making for the commercial traffickers. And the list goes on and on and on. We don't have enough time to cover all those, but I can tell you.
You have said, as the chairman in the Judiciary Committee, as well as now in your current capacity, that Kentucky cannot jail its way out of this problem, nor should it, that more treatment options are needed. The cases keep coming in, though, and some of these counties say, we can't do it. You have Madison County now being advised by a task force to build a $50 million jail and treatment facility, and the county judge executive says, where do we get the money?
Well, it's a problem all over our state. Right now, Bill, the sad part, and really the reality, is that every jail where we house state prisoners in every state prison is at capacity or above. We have no more room at the end. We don't have an available bed anywhere. Louisville is acutely overcrowded, as are so many of our counties that house state prisoners across our Commonwealth. And so right now we have close to 23,500 state prisoners, and that doesn't include county inmates sitting in county jails across the state. But we are different than most states. We house well over a third of our state inmates in county jails. Only Louisiana does that like we do, and that poses some additional difficulties as well. That's a whole other topic for another show, but we have complexities here that maybe other states don't, and that's part of the issue.
We hear from employers that it is a real problem in trying to get a quality workforce. I know that is certainly a priority of the Bevin administration, is to try to attract new jobs to the state. But getting an applicant pool who can pass the drug screens is proving to be difficult.
It really is, and we hear anecdotally, and sometimes we actually see the raw numbers of hundreds of job applicants, and a majority of those applicants drug testing positive and eliminating themselves from the process on the front end. And we know that we've lost potential employers here in Kentucky because of our rates of addiction. We know that we've lost potential employers here because we don't have the workforce, and that's got to change over these next few years, and we're working hard from our end in the Justice Cabinet to do that. We heard yesterday from Secretary of Labor Derek Ramsey before a committee we've formed. We're working together with an apprenticeship program to train inmates in certain trades, so when they leave prison they have a job ready-made for them in a trade, whether it be an electrician, a machinist, a welder, and that's critical, because those are immediate fill positions and we can fill them.
Going forward, do you have any recommendations or proposals for the state legislature coming up in the coming session as to how to engage this challenge?
The governor and I formed a criminal justice policy assessment council. Every possible stakeholder in the criminal justice system and beyond, mental health providers, drug treatment, again, workforce experts, law enforcement, prosecutors, everyone who has a stake in this is sitting on this 23-member panel. We'll have subgroups which break out beneath that 23-member panel, and we hope to come sometime in January with recommendations for legislation in the 2017 session. We just had our second meeting. We've just begun. I think it'll be phase 2 of criminal justice reform for Kentucky. We're already, I think, ahead of the game in drug policy, but that doesn't mean we can't continue. The governor challenged the drug control policy director director and me in a meeting just the other day. We had met all 6 recommendations, and he said it's time for 7, 8, and 9. And that's, I think, what we'll take into this next legislative session, that we have to be better than everyone else because we have a more acute problem. And so we'll have a set of recommendations, and as you said, it'll be comprehensive.
All right, Kentucky's Justice and Safety Cabinet Secretary John Tilley is with us on Kentucky Newsmakers. More questions in a moment outside the realm of the drug issue in Kentucky. We're back with that, and we have more ahead on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back in. Good to have you with us here on Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. Justice Secretary John Tilley continuing as our guest. Criminal justice reform is a broad term, but one of the facets of that, the legislature has passed felony expungement.
Sure.
Who will be eligible for that, and how will that be done?
Well, the legislature took it upon themselves, and I think there was a great deal of thought put into the 61 felonies they listed as eligible for expungement. They can begin to apply now. There is a $500 fee. I think there's plenty of help out there. I know that I've spoken publicly about it, been asked to continue to try to explain how to petition for that expungement. And I think it's a great start. We became the 28th state to do it. We're not an outlier. There's a national movement now to give people who've been convicted of felonies a second chance, especially the low-level, nonviolent felonies. And I think, especially for those who've carried that burden, that economic death sentence, essentially, for years and years, it's time to give them a fresh start. I think, as our governor has said so many times, I mean, America's the land of second chances, and we've got to afford people that chance.
As you try to get people to be stakeholders in some of the solutions to some of these problems, you know, we talk about having these overcrowded jails and facilities and cannot get enough treatment to people who have the issues, but yet there was a report this week that crime statistics in this country are actually way down from where they were. We have a lot less crime now than we did 30 years ago in this country, and yet there's no denying that people out there do not feel safe. What's the disconnect?
Well, I mean, I think it's so different now because we are just wired in at all moments to hear about the latest crime that occurs because of social media. You know, 2 lines on Twitter and you've learned about another event that's happened somewhere in the world. And I think so it all comes crashing in on people. You know, I've been trying to let people know that for years, that crime is actually down. In Kentucky, it's been flat and dropping slightly for years since the mid-1970s. We're one of the safest 5 states in the country. In Kentucky. Our neighbors to the south in Tennessee, the #1 most dangerous state oftentimes. And so I think we do things right here. We have, I think, the most and well-trained law enforcement. We have more hours and more in-service for training just down the road at EKU mostly, but at our academies as well that are across the state. And so I think we do it right in a lot of ways. But to convince people that we are safe, again, unless relative to previous years and relative to past times, it's hard to do. So there's a tremendous disconnect, but I think it just begins with an awareness campaign. In
your capacity, you oversee Kentucky State Police. As you see what has happened in the country with police and community relations, what are your observations about what needs to change?
Well, I think, again, the way we do it in Kentucky, I mean, I come from Hopkinsville, and my police chief 3 or 4 years ago began meeting with community leaders and began going into communities, having cookouts and playing with children on playgrounds and building trust. He took his officers there in mass. And that's going on across the state now. I know they're doing it in Frankfort. I was at a Unity March last night. I know my state police are highly trained. And what we think is that because we are the most highly trained force, again, that's across all manner of law enforcement in Kentucky, from the state police to sheriffs to municipal law enforcement, that's why, you know, knock on wood, we've not seen the problems here in Kentucky. I don't hear the complaints that my counterparts here across the country and we've been talking about for years. I do think there's a sense of community. There's a sense of unity with these communities and law enforcement. That's not to say there aren't disconnects. That's not to say there aren't pockets in the state that need work, but I think the groundwork has been laid. That formula is here in Kentucky for the rest of the country to observe and use. KSP is hiring right now and sort of openly recruiting from
local police departments. Is that the best place to find officers who are willing to do that kind of work?
Well, one thing we did, we finally, after a decade of really, efforts, we finally gave our men and women in the state police a raise, a much-needed raise. They were not the highest-paid law enforcement agency in the state and weren't close, but now we've given them a real raise and a real reason to stay in the state police. And our numbers should climb back up. We're around 850 to 60 now. We should be closer to 1050 or 1100 of state policemen and women across the state. We're not there yet. We think we'll get there. I've encountered some of the most dedicated people in our state police. That, as a prosecutor, I knew them years and years ago, and I've continued to work with them in the legislature. But to get to know them on this level now, our new commissioner and his deputy are again doing a great job. I think they were left a job to do. I think there's some good work done, but there's more to do, and they're doing it today. So I feel very confident in them.
What do you see happening ahead in your tenure heading up the Justice and Safety Cabinet? What would be your priority? What would have made you have had a successful term, if it can be said that got done?
Well, I think we have to foster an environment where everything we do is measured for performance, where we're accountable and transparent. And again, in everything we do, we're accountable to the public and the taxpayer, and that at the end of the day, that we provide for public safety, we reform wrongdoers, and that we make taxpayers happy as well, that we're returning on the investment they give us in the best way possible each and every day. And I think that's where the governor and I come right together on those issues. And I think at the end of the day, if we can step back and look at those things across all our departments, from prisons to juvenile justice, again, corrections and juvenile justice, to the state police, to criminal justice training. I even have the Department for Public Advocacy in the cabinet. It's a huge cabinet. And if I can do those things with all those agencies, it'll be a success.
You were a Democratic lawmaker. You were seen as a consensus builder in that position. You've gone to work for a Republican governor. How does that work?
You know, I feel very at home, because at the end of the day, when I get in the cabinet meetings, I've developed a bond with cabinet secretaries. I think, again, I've never felt that this was an us against them proposition. I feel like that policy ought to carry the day, that what's best for the people ought to carry the day, and politics should take a backseat to people. And I feel like those I'm working with now feel the same way, and I felt the same with my Democratic counterparts as well. I mean, again, when I was working as a Democrat, my Republican counterparts were the same to me as, again, the Democrats. It never made a difference to me, and I think that's what's been refreshing about the people I've had a chance to work with every day so far.
If you could peel back the curtain for us and we just have a minute left, when those cabinet meetings are held, which of course the public does not get to see, right, do different cabinet secretaries talk about issues in the other cabinets? I mean, do you sometimes talk about health policy? Do they advise you about things, or?
You know, not so much, because at the end of the day, we rely on each other's expertise. What we do, though, is that we offer help. I mean, there's so much that again, it transfers. There's so much overlap. There's we work, again, closely with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, because a lot of what's going on in justice is drug policy, but a lot of what can be done in drug policy overlaps with what they're doing in health and family services. So there's a lot of that. But no, I don't offer much advice to other cabinet secretaries. I might be stepping on some toes there. They need me to stay in my lane. So,
Secretary Tilley, thanks for coming. Appreciate
Thank you,
it very
Bill.
much.
Enjoy it.
Keep it here on WKYT and Kentucky Newsmakers. WKYT Sam Dick talks with Lexington's police chief about law enforcement and community relations. That, and we'll also hear from Senator Ralph Alvarado, who spoke at the Republican convention, coming up. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. With the recent events going on in the country, WKYT Sam Dick thought it was a good idea to catch up with Lexington Police Chief Mark Barnard and discuss some of the issues out there.
Is that a cop dead?
And people were calling, people were texting, asking if we were watching it.
Lexington's chief of police watched like the rest of America. His biggest fear as a police chief came true in Dallas. There's gunfire, police rush towards the danger, and they're ambushed.
That person took advantage and knew what they would do. They would respond to protect others, and they held that against them and then assassinated those officers and murdered them.
Chief Barnard says he quickly talked to his command staff and made sure the word filtered down during roll calls to all his officers that the Lexington community supported them.
I had great and tremendous response from all sorts of faith-based leaders, other people, other organizations that said they stood by the Lexington Police Department.
The Dallas shooting of police officers came days after two highly publicized incidents of white officers shooting and killing black men.
Do you feel like members of the African American community right now are fearful as a whole of a police officer in Lexington, Kentucky?
I think across the nation, I think a lot of people are fearful. I think the African American community, on our website right now, we've talked with the NAACP, we're going out to churches, we're saying how to interact with a police officer. We're ahead of the curve in Lexington. We want to stay ahead of the curve, but that comes with communication and talking to people about what they think we need.
He says they monitor and review cases of possible police abuse in other cities. And he says he's absolutely satisfied with the use of force by Lexington police. But there's always room for improvement.
We have a program in place that looks at our use of force. We have a new committee that meets quarterly that looks at all use of force issues. And we have a reporting system in place to make sure that if someone's using too much force or if it looks like they're using it too often, that we can address that issue.
We talked for an hour near the Fayette County Peace Officers Memorial.
We know our profession needs changing and adjusting. We're a reflection of society, and the best way for people to communicate is to understand.
He says he has tough conversations with leaders of the African American community, leaders of all faiths, including Muslims, listens to their concerns, and has tried to recruit and hire more minority officers and diverse candidates. But he believes the police are only a part of the solution.
I think that's our message, is that these courageous conversations about really where we are in the United States now, whether it's racial divide, whether it's an understanding of what people are saying, you don't always have to agree, but maybe come to some understanding and respect that opinion. Those communications have to be open, and we try to do that.
Lexington's Police Chief Mark Barnard there speaking with our Sam Dick. Well, State Senator Ralph Alvarado, he's a Republican from Winchester and a physician, was in the spotlight this week in Cleveland at the Republican National Convention when he addressed the delegates there. And here is some of what he said at the podium.
From the great Commonwealth of Kentucky, the home of horses, bourbon, coal, bluegrass, and the finest people on earth, allow me to express my sincerest appreciation and gratitude for the privilege of addressing this assembly. I'm proud to stand before you tonight as the first Hispanic member ever elected to the Kentucky General Assembly. Today, we have a president who has not only failed to end racial tension, he has made us more divided than ever. Today, we have a president who is itching to restrict our fundamental constitutional rights, such as religious liberty, the right to bear arms, and free speech. Today, we have a president who has rejected honesty and transparency, lying to the American people over and over again, from Obamacare to the promise of immigration reform, to Fast and Furious, to phone record spying, to an IRS enemies list, to green energy crony bankruptcies, to Benghazi, to the VA scandal, to the Iran nuclear deal. The list just goes on and on and on. And with Hillary Clinton, this 8-year nightmare will get far, far worse. Americans face a very important decision. Do we want someone who is brutally honest, perhaps to a fault, or do we want someone who is brutally dishonest? It is not a decision this year about America moving left or about America moving right. It's a decision about America going up or America going down. And by protecting the American dream, we can make America first again. There is only one candidate who will protect it for our current and future generations, and that candidate is Donald Trump. And now I have a message for my Spanish-speaking Latino friends at home. A mis hermanos hispanos, nuestras familias se fugaron de países llenos de corrupción y políticos mentirosos. Por favor, no permitan que esa miseria ocurra también en este país. Vivimos en una isla de libertad y oportunidad. Por favor, voten para proteger eso. Voten conmigo, voten republicano y voten por Donald Trump. And I've got a message for one more person. Hillary Clinton, you have failed the Hispanic community, and you don't deserve our vote. God bless this convention. God bless our country. Thank you very much.
State Senator Ralph Alvarado, who spoke to the Republican National Convention this week. By the way, Kentucky Secretary of State Allison Lundergan Grimes will be speaking to the Democratic National Convention. That is set for next Thursday, as they will be meeting in Philadelphia to nominate Hillary Clinton as their presidential nominee. Well, next week on Kentucky Newsmakers, U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell, our scheduled guest. He'll talk about his recent autobiography and about issues facing the country. And that's Kentucky Newsmakers this week. Thank you so much for being along. We'll see you bright and early on WKYT this morning. We start at 4:30 a.m. and we certainly hope you make it a good week ahead.